the quiet H no one sees. There is a kind of loneliness that hides well. It knows how to smile in photographs. It knows how to respond to messages. It knows how to keep a full schedule. It knows how to show up, perform, contribute, help, care, and keep moving. And still, when the day softens, when the room grows quiet, when the scrolling stops, when the roles fall away, there it is, that hollow place, that ache that is hard to name, that feeling that no matter how many people you are around, something essential is missing. This book begins with something deeply important. Loneliness is not just the absence of people. More often, it is the absence of feeling seen, understood, emotionally safe, and truly connected not only to others but sometimes even to yourself. That distinction changes everything. If loneliness were only about numbers, a crowded calendar would solve it. If it were only about the company, busyness would heal it. If it were only about finding one perfect person, waiting would be enough. But this book rejects those easy myths. It says, the way loneliness begins to fade is not through noise, panic, or collecting people out of fear. It begins with deliberate choices, small, practical, emotionally honest choices that rebuild your relationship with yourself first, and then help you create the kinds of bonds that nourish you. That is why this audiobook matters. It does not treat loneliness as a personal defect, nor does it shame the longing for connection. It does not tell you to love your own company and stop needing people. And it does not offer shallow optimism. Instead, it offers something stronger: understanding, structure, compassion, practical action, a pathway. The book is built on a tender and liberating idea. Connection is not only something that happens to us, it is something we can cultivate, a skill, a rhythm, a set of choices, a way of relating to ourselves and others that can be strengthened over time. And that is the most hopeful thing you can hear at the beginning of a journey like this, that you are not doomed to the ache you have known, that the fog can become a map, that silence can become information, that pain can become direction. This audiobook follows the same living arc as the manuscript. First, it helps you face the truth of your loneliness clearly and without shame. Then it brings you inward, helping you rebuild the relationship with yourself. Then it moves toward fear, vulnerability, friendship, healing from past wounds, healthier relationships, different life stages, and finally, a practical reset that turns connection into daily action. The table of contents itself makes this path visible, moving from understanding loneliness to reconnecting with yourself, overcoming fear of connection, finding your people, healing old wounds, nurturing healthy bonds, navigating life stages, and completing a 30-day connection reset. That structure matters because so many women try to solve loneliness backward. They rush to socialize before they understand what kind of loneliness they are carrying. They chase connection before examining the shame layered on top of their need. They seek closeness while still speaking to themselves with cruelty. They fill the calendar but leave the deeper ache untouched. This audiobook takes a more human route. It slows down long enough to ask better questions. What shape does your loneliness take? When does it rise? What stories do they accompany it? What old wounds are still shaping how you reach, trust, open, and stay? These are not small questions. They are the kinds that return a person to herself, and once that return begins, everything starts to change. The audiobook also insists on something many women need to hear more often. Wanting connection is not a weakness. It is not evidence that you are needy, broken, behind, boring, or failing. It is human. And when loneliness is met with shame, it becomes heavier than it needs to be. That is why the manuscript repeatedly returns to a gentler language, one that encourages women to rewrite thoughts like, "I'm unlovable," into something truer, such as, "I'm craving connection," which is a normal human need. That sentence alone can feel like oxygen. because shame isolates, but truth reconnects. And the truth is this: there are many faces of loneliness: emotional loneliness, situational loneliness, comparison-driven loneliness. Loneliness disguised as irritability, exhaustion, busyness, or endless scrolling. The book names these forms carefully because various kinds of loneliness ask for various kinds of healing. You cannot soothe the emotional loneliness the same way you heal the disorientation that follows grief, divorce, motherhood, relocation, or the slow exhaustion of social comparison. That clarity is part of what makes this book so compassionate. It does not throw every lonely woman into the same emotional room. It pays attention. It honors context. It notices life stage, history, fear, fatigue, and old relational injuries. It understands that connection is not only about who is around you, but about what has happened to you, what you believe in yourself, and how safe it feels to be real with another human being. And then the audiobook offers what I think so many people long for when they are lonely: not just insight, but movement. Track your patterns, rewrite the harsh voice, practice deliberate solitude. Reach out gently. Find spaces where repeated, low-pressure connections can happen. Invest in energy-giving relationships. Process grief. Build safe emotional spaces. And keep a connection journal so change becomes visible over time. Notice the spirit of that list. Nothing dramatic, nothing performative, nothing is built on desperation. The book trusts accumulation. It trusts small steps. It trusts the quiet power of repeated acts of care. That is exactly how this audiobook has been shaped. Not as a lecture, but as companionship. Not as a list of rules, but as a guided return. A return to self-respect. A return to emotional honesty. A return to the kind of connection that does not ask you to betray yourself to belong. So, as we begin, let yourself hear this clearly. You are not too late. You are not too much. You are not behind for wanting a deeper connection. You are not failing because loneliness has visited your life. You are human. You are allowed to need closeness. You are allowed to rebuild. You are allowed to become someone who feels more held, more seen, more rooted, and more at home in her own life. And that starts here, not with a crowd, not with a dramatic breakthrough, but with one honest breath, one clear look inward, one small, brave choice. This is Women and Loneliness. And this journey is not about escaping yourself. It is about returning to yourself deeply enough that a real connection can finally begin. Facing the truth, understanding what your loneliness is really telling you. Loneliness becomes harder when it remains vague, when it is just a fog, a heaviness, a word you say without really knowing what sits inside it. That is why this first stage matters so much. The book begins by asking you not to run from loneliness, numb it, or shame it, but to study it. To notice when it appears, what it sounds like in your mind, how it feels in your body, and the kind of life you are living. Only then does the path forward become visible. That shift from judgment to observation is transformative. Once loneliness stops being a sentence and becomes information, you gain agency. The manuscript makes it especially clear that loneliness is not a single experience. There is emotional loneliness, in which people may surround you yet still feel invisible. There is situational loneliness, born of life changes such as divorce, grief, retirement, relocation, or motherhood. There is comparison-driven loneliness, sharpened by social media and the illusion that everyone else is living in effortless belonging. And then there is loneliness in disguise, appearing as fatigue, irritability, compulsive scrolling, or the strange feeling of being full and empty at once. Think about how important that is. It means the solution is not always more people. Sometimes it is more depth. Sometimes it is grief work. Sometimes it is a quieter digital life. Sometimes it is resting. Sometimes it is honesty. Sometimes it is not about adding at all, but about understanding what has already been happening within you. The book offers something beautifully practical here. Track it for 1 week, for 2 weeks. Notice when loneliness rises, what triggers it, what thought accompanies it, and how it feels in the body. The manuscript suggests questions like, when did I feel most alone today? What triggered the disconnection? Who was around? What story followed? What did I feel in my body? This turns loneliness from a murky ache into a map. And maps matter. Without them, you end up treating every lonely feeling the same way. You sign up for events when what you really need is to process grief. You scroll for connection when what you really need is one honest conversation. You fill the week when what you really need is to stop speaking to yourself in shame. That is another of the manuscript's strongest insights. Loneliness often feels heavier because of the self-talk layered on top of it. I am bored. Everyone else has figured life out. I am unlovable. I have a problem. The book calls attention to these thoughts not to dramatize them, but to interrupt them. It repeatedly encourages women to write these stories down and rewrite them in a neutral or kind voice, because shame does not inspire connection, it pushes it further away. That difference may sound small, but it is not. It changes the entire emotional climate. One version shuts the door, the other opens it. The book also goes beyond present-day triggers. It asks about roots, life transitions, old wounds, low self-esteem, grief, social habits that keep you surrounded yet unseen, patterns of overpleasing, withdrawing, staying surface level, or pouring into relationships that drain more than they nourish. It suggests timelines, relationship inventories, and expressive writing to uncover the anchors that keep loneliness in place. This matters because loneliness is not always about the present moment. Sometimes the present moment touches something older, a breakup that was never fully grieved, a move that left you untethered, a season of motherhood that reshaped your identity, a friendship wound that made vulnerability feel dangerous, a long habit of believing you must be easy, strong, polished, or useful to be wanted. No wonder connection can feel complicated. No wonder loneliness can linger longer than you expected. And still, the book is never hopeless here. It does not dig into roots to leave you there. It digs because what can be named can be worked with. Once you know what kind of loneliness you are carrying, you stop chasing the wrong cure. There is also profound wisdom in the manuscript's guidance on digital life. It recognizes how comparison-driven isolation operates, how quickly a few minutes online can turn an ordinary evening into a sense of falling behind, being overlooked, or inhabiting the wrong timeline. Its suggestion of a social media audit tracking your mood before and after use, muting accounts that trigger inadequacy, limiting exposure, and replacing some scrolling with real-life contact is not just practical, it is emotionally protective. Not all loneliness begins in silence. Sometimes it begins with overstimulation, in seeing too many curated lives and too little truth, in mistaking filtered images for proof that everyone else belongs more easily than you do. And the most tender part of this first movement is this. The book keeps refusing to accept that loneliness is proof of brokenness. Again, it returns to compassion, a signal, a need, a guide. Not a scarlet letter, not a verdict, not a permanent identity. That is the first door. To stop fighting the feeling long enough to understand it, to let it become legible, to let it speak, to hear what it is asking for. It is asking for one emotionally safe person, for the rest, for a life stage transition to be honored rather than rushed past, for your inner voice to become kinder, for your social circle to become more aligned, for you to stop telling yourself that needing connection is embarrassing. Whatever the answer is, this is where you begin to find it, not by running faster, by listening more closely. And once you listen, the fog begins to lift. Not all at once, but enough. Enough to take the next step. Enough to know where your feet are. Enough to believe that what once felt shapeless can become navigable. That is the real work of understanding loneliness, not dwelling on pain and translating it, so it can finally lead you somewhere better. Reconnecting with yourself first, becoming a safe place to return to. There is a reason the book insists on this stage before moving outward. When your relationship with yourself feels fragile, other relationships begin to carry impossible weight. They become lifelines instead of additions, proof of worth instead of places of mutual care, refugees from self-criticism instead of shared spaces of warmth. That is why the manuscript places self-reconnection at the center, not as a substitute for people, but as a foundation. It makes clear that reconnecting with yourself creates the steadiness that lets you enter into friendship, love, family, and community by choice rather than desperation. This is not the shallow version of self-love, not slogans, not denial, not pretending that being alone is always blissful. The book is more serious and more compassionate than that. It is about a relationship with yourself built through repeated practices, gentler self-talk, deliberate solitude, body awareness, self-trust, rediscovering joy, and learning to see your own company as valid rather than second best. Let us start with the voice inside the inner dialogue. So much loneliness is intensified there, not only by the ache itself, but also by the commentary layered on top of it. I am not enough. I always end up alone. I ruin things. I am too much. No wonder this book returns to the importance of catching those thoughts, labeling them, and rewriting them in a more truthful, compassionate voice. It is not decorative work. It is structural work. The way you speak to yourself shapes how you enter every room and every relationship. That means the shift begins in tiny moments, writing the thought down, noticing whether it is supportive, neutral, or critical, and asking, what would I say to a friend carrying this fear? That simple movement from cruelty to compassion changes solitude. It changes the emotional weather of your own company. Once your company feels less punishing, being alone no longer feels quite so dangerous. The manuscript also introduces one of its most beautiful ideas, deliberate solitude, not accidental aloneness, not being stuck with yourself because no one else is around, but choosing time with yourself on purpose in ways that feel grounded and nourishing, a phone-free walk, a cafe visit, reading in a quiet corner, making yourself breakfast, creating small rituals that teach the nervous system that being alone can be calm, safe, and even quietly enjoyable. This matters so much. When solitude is only associated with abandonment, cancellation, or emotional hunger, it becomes hard to bear. But when solitude is practiced as presence, it begins to transform, not into the absence of longing, but into a steadier place from which longing no longer controls you. The book is also wise enough to include the body, not just thoughts, not just emotions, the body. It recognizes that many women move through life disconnected from their physical signals, tense, overextended, overstimulated, and often unsure of what they feel until the overwhelm is already high. That is why practices like body scans, breath, mindful pauses, and deliberate physical care matter here. They reintroduce you to yourself as someone you can listen to and tend. There is something profound in that. If you cannot hear your own body, it becomes easier to use other people as regulators, as anchors, as proof that you are okay. But when you begin checking in with yourself, how am I feeling? What do I need? What is tight? What is tired? You become less likely to seek every answer outside yourself. That is not isolation. It is grounding. Then there is self-trust, one of the quiet casualties of loneliness. The manuscript notes that disconnection can erode confidence in your reliability, so it suggests making one small promise to yourself each day and keeping it. A walk, a page of writing, a phone call, a small act of care, tiny promises, kept consistently, begin to rebuild something essential, the sense that you can count on yourself. And this is not small at all. When you trust yourself, you stop entering relationships as if they were your only source of steadiness. You begin to carry steadiness with you. The book also poses a life-giving question in this section. What brings you joy, apart from anyone else's approval? That question can be surprisingly difficult after years of roles, caregiving, pressure, and adaptation. The manuscript suggests creating joy inventories, revisiting childhood pleasures, exploring curiosities, and slowly rediscovering activities that make you feel alive in your own life, not to fill time. Remember for yourself. This is one of the most healing aspects of reconnecting with yourself. You start remembering that your life can hold texture, beauty, play, interest, and small delights even before every emotional need is perfectly met. As that happens, a subtle yet vital change begins. Relationships stop being asked to rescue you from emptiness. Instead, they begin to join a life that already contains breath, rhythm, and a measure of inner companionship. The manuscript makes it clear that this does not mean you no longer need people. It means you no longer approach them from a place of collapse. You choose rather than chase. You discern rather than cling. You ask whether a connection genuinely aligns or quiets a void for a moment. That discernment is precious. Because it protects you from bonding only out of fear, it helps you walk away from what drains you. It also allows you to approach connection without abandoning yourself. One of the loveliest practical threads running through this section is its emphasis on daily rhythm, morning self-checks, rewritten thoughts, a small promise, a little body awareness, a few minutes of deliberate solitude, then evening reflection on how you showed up for yourself. The point is not perfection, but consistency, teaching the nervous system and the heart that you are no longer someone you leave behind. Read that again in your own way. You are no longer someone you leave behind. Because loneliness is not only about who is absent, sometimes it is about how often you have been absent from yourself. Not because you failed, because life got loud, because roles took over, because pain made it hard to stay, because criticism became familiar, because no one taught you how to be kind to yourself. This book teaches that, patiently, gently, practically. And once that relationship begins to strengthen, you feel it everywhere, in how you rest, in how you speak to yourself, in how quickly you spiral, in what kinds of relationships do you tolerate, in what kinds of conversations do you feel brave enough to have. This is not about becoming self-sufficient in a harsh, isolated sense. It is about becoming rooted so that when the connection comes, you can receive it without disappearing into it. And that may be one of the deepest forms of healing there is. Not becoming someone who needs no one, becoming someone who can need others without losing herself. Breaking barriers, overcoming fear of connection without losing yourself. There is a painful paradox at the heart of loneliness. Sometimes, the people who crave connection most deeply are also the ones who fear it most. Not because they do not care, because they care so much, because they know what it costs when the connection fails, because somewhere in their body or memory, vulnerability has been linked to pain, disappointment, judgment, betrayal, abandonment, humiliation, silence. This is where the book becomes especially tender and psychologically astute. It recognizes that fear of connection is not always loud. Sometimes it appears as hesitation, overthinking, emotional distance, chronic busyness, staying on the surface, or constantly waiting for the other person to go first. The desire for closeness is there, but so is the reflex to pull back. That reflex deserves compassion, because it usually learns for itself for a reason. You opened once and were minimized. A friendship broke in a way that taught you not to trust softness. A partner turned honesty into criticism. A family system taught you to be useful rather than emotionally real. Rejection came early enough that your whole nervous system began bracing before you even knew what you were doing. The manuscript does not dismiss those defenses. It studies them. It suggests logs, trigger tracking, body awareness, and careful reflection on the exact moments fear arises when someone asks a personal question, when you want to text first, when you consider sharing more honestly, or when a room feels socially uncertain. It asks what thought appears and what happens in the body. This is important because fear becomes easier to work with once it is no longer mysterious. And this is one of the book's quiet gifts. It brings fear into the light, not to expose you, but to free you. Once you see the pattern, you stop treating each wave of fear as objective truth. You notice the sequence. Something happens, a story forms, the body reacts. Then an old protective behavior takes over. Withdraw, overthink, hide, pretend, scroll, cancel, smile while staying unreachable. But if the sequence is visible, it can also be interrupted. That is why the book recommends gentle exposure rather than dramatic leaps, not oversharing with strangers or forcing yourself into emotional danger in the name of growth. Something more humane, one safe person, one mildly honest statement, one small need voiced, one slight lowering of the guard, and then reflection afterward. What happened? What I feared would happen? And what my body learned from this moment. This is such wise advice. The nervous system learns through experience, not theory alone. If you want your body to believe that not every act of openness ends in harm, you need to experience something small enough to survive and repeat. The book also addresses rejection with unusual maturity. It recognizes how quickly a missed response, a faded friendship, or a cool reaction can become a verdict in a lonely mind. But it encourages a different lens, rejection as information, as redirection, as context, not always as proof of inadequacy. That reframing does not erase pain. It simply prevents pain from becoming identity. And that distinction matters more than most people realize. When every disappointment becomes proof that you are unworthy, you stop taking relational risks. But when disappointment becomes something you can feel and still survive, connection becomes possible again. Another strong thread in this section is regulation, grounding, breath, returning to the body before the mind turns fear into a full narrative. The manuscript offers practical methods, the 5-4-3-2-1 grounding technique, slow breathing, physical anchoring, and deliberate pauses, because it recognizes that when the body is activated, logic alone is often insufficient. Safety must be felt, not merely argued. That is such an important truth. You do not heal fear of connection by thinking better thoughts alone. You also heal it by teaching your body that vulnerability and danger are not always the same thing. Then the book turns to communication. And here it is quietly brave, because so much fear of connection persists in silence, not saying what you need, not naming what you feel, not asking for clarity or making the first move. The manuscript gently encourages women to practice small, clear expressions of need, to ask, state, request, and speak honestly rather than guess. Not because every relationship will respond perfectly, but because learning to voice yourself is part of becoming emotionally available without becoming emotionally erased. This is a beautiful distinction. Connection is about feeling more and expressing more clearly, and expression becomes easier when your self-worth is not entirely resting on the outcome. The book also introduces something else that is deeply necessary: boundaries as support for vulnerability, not as walls, not as punishments, as guidelines that make openness sustainable. The line from later in the manuscript is excellent here. Boundaries are not walls. They are what make emotional spaces safe enough to remain open. Clarity about what you need, whether you want listening, privacy, slowness, or consistency, helps protect the connection from becoming another site of emotional overwhelm. This is crucial for lonely women, especially those who have mistaken openness for overexposure in the past. You do not have to share everything at once. You do not have to trust everyone right away. You do not have to earn closeness through self-disclosure, which can leave you emotionally flooded. You can stay open and paced, honest and protected, tender and discerning. That is a mature connection, and that is exactly what this book aims to build. There is even wisdom here for the imagination. The manuscript suggests visualization, rehearsing a safe connection in the mind, seeing yourself grounded, open, breathing, speaking naturally, and tolerating the moment without collapsing. That may sound small, but rehearsal matters. The nervous system responds to repeated images of steadiness, making real-life connections feel less alien and less threatening. Little by little, the fear stops running the whole room. It may still speak, it may still tighten your chest, it may still whisper warnings, but it stops being the final authority. And this is the heart of the whole section. The goal is not to eliminate discomfort forever. Rather, the goal is to tolerate enough vulnerability so that the life you want becomes more available than the fear you inherited. That is courage, not fearlessness, movement in fear, softness with wisdom, reach with discernment, honesty with pacing. As those qualities grow, connection changes. You stop performing perfection. You stop waiting endlessly for others to make all the first moves. You stop treating every relational risk as the edge of a cliff. You start allowing small moments of truth to accumulate. Over time, those small moments become a new story. A story in which connection is not always catastrophic. A story in which honesty can deepen rather than destroy. A story in which your heart slowly and safely learns that opening is still possible, finding your people and building bonds that truly nourish you. One of the loneliest experiences in the world is being surrounded by people who are not the right kind. There are people, but not the right kinds. Acquaintances without depth, conversations without warmth. Social circles are built on convenience, role, proximity, or politeness, not true resonance. The book understands this deeply. It says that many women are lonely not only because they avoid people, but also because the interactions that fill their days often remain too superficial to satisfy the deeper emotional need for mutual understanding, shared values, authenticity, and emotional safety. A full calendar is not the same as belonging. That is why this part of the journey matters so much. Finding your people is not random luck. It is a relational skill, a matter of clarity, placement, repetition, and care. The manuscript begins wisely with discernment. What kind of people are you looking for? Not just generally nice, not simply available, but aligned, curious, resolute, warm, emotionally reciprocal, humorous, thoughtful, safe. Values matter here because if you search vaguely, you tend to land on vague matches. The book encourages women to journal specifically about the qualities that matter most in a friend or partner, so the connection becomes intentional rather than random. This is such an underrated step. Many lonely people are not only seeking connection, they are seeking relief. And relief can make almost any attention seem promising in the short term. But if you have not clarified what nourishes you, you may keep pouring energy into relationships that are active without being alive. The book also emphasizes where connections form best, not in frantic searching, but in repeated, low-pressure spaces organized around real interests. Classes, hobbies, volunteering, learning environments, community groups, parenting groups, niche circles, activity-based spaces. The point is not to show up with the desperate goal of finding my people tonight. The point is to put yourself in places where resonance can build naturally over time. Research and relational common sense both support this. Closeness grows quietly through repeated contact in shared context. That is emotionally relieving because it means you do not need to be dazzled. You do not need to force chemistry. You do not need to manufacture intimacy on command. Please keep showing where something real, could grow. There is patience in that. And patience is part of a healthy connection. Not everyone is your person. Not every conversation becomes a bond. Not every group will feel like home. But an aligned environment can change everything. A book club, a workshop, a hiking group, a support space, a class, a neighborhood circle, a room where what matters to you also matters to others. The manuscript also recognizes that finding your people is not only about new relationships, it is also about deepening existing ones. One of its most practical and emotionally brave suggestions is to choose one safe person and share something more honest than usual. Not everything, just one true sentence more than you normally would. I've been feeling disconnected. I want to be more intentional about my friendships. Would you like to meet more regularly? These small initiations can transform relationships that have long hovered on the edge of depth. This is important because many women wait for others to go first. Often, the other person is waiting too. Friendships want more oxygen, but no one breaks the surface. One honest statement can do that. One small invitation, one vulnerable sentence. I want something more here. The book is also unafraid to ask harder questions. Where is your energy going now? Who leaves you feeling lighter? Who leaves you feeling smaller? Who makes you feel seen? And who makes you feel like you disappear when you talk? Its relationship inventory exercises identifying energy givers and energy drainers, and reflecting on whether people leave you supported or depleted are not cynical, they are clarifying. You cannot build a nourishing social life if most of your relational energy is spent maintaining what consistently empties you. This is one of the book's strongest themes in its middle chapters. Connection is not simply about quantity, it is about emotional quality. Protecting that quality sometimes means giving less time to what drains you, so you have more to invest in what heals. There is also a beautiful concept here: safe emotional spaces. Few, only one or two. Relationships where you can be your full self without fear, where honesty is not punished, where your nervous system does not brace, and where your words can land and stay. The manuscript describes these spaces as transformative not because they solve everything, but because even one or two truly reciprocal, trustworthy connections can dramatically ease loneliness and strengthen confidence elsewhere in your life. That is one of the most comforting truths in this book. You do not need an enormous circle. You do not need constant social success. You need some relaxation, some reciprocity, and some steady places to land. And the book is careful here too. Safe spaces are built, not wished into existence, through trust, through consistency, through boundaries, through repeated honesty, through checking in with yourself to see whether a relationship truly leaves you lighter, steadier, and more able to be whole. There is also courage in what this section does not say. It does not tell you to be agreeable at all costs. It does not tell you to become more marketable. It does not tell you to erase your needs to seem easy, quite the opposite. The deeper message is this: your real people are far more likely to find you when you are living in alignment rather than in performance. That means choosing spaces that reflect your true values, speaking more honestly, and letting your real interests guide where you show up so you can become more visible in the ways that matter, and trusting that resonance grows stronger in truth than in disguise. The manuscript's overall tone is hopeful without being naive. Finding your people takes time. It may require grieving old circles, walking away from convenient relationships, trying new spaces, and making small initiations more than once. But it is possible. The more intentional you become, the more possible it becomes. Over time, what once felt like random social luck begins to feel more like authorship. You know what nourishes you. You know where to place yourself. You know how to deepen a bond. You know how to protect your energy. You know how to recognize safety when you feel it. That is how belonging begins to shift, not as something you chase from the outside, but as something you help create. through placement, through clarity, through patience, through one enjoyable conversation after another, until one day, what once felt impossible becomes ordinary. A message that feels warm, a coffee that deepens into trust, a friendship that endures, a room where your body relaxes, a conversation in which you realize, I did not have to perform to be welcome here. That is what it means to find your people. Yes, you deserve that kind of belonging, healing old wounds, protecting the healthy ones, and thriving through life's changes. Loneliness is about the present. Sometimes it is about what still lives within it. A grief not fully spoken, a loss still echoing, a breakup that altered your trust, a betrayal within a friendship that taught you to stay guarded, a role that consumed you, a life transition that reshaped your map, a season of motherhood, divorce, widowhood, relocation, retirement, empty nesting, or starting over that quietly rearranged how you belong in the world. The book is deeply humane here. It understands that connection becomes harder when the heart still carries older pain, and that meeting new people cannot solve all loneliness. Some loneliness asks first to be mourned. Some tasks need processing. Some ask to be honored as a life stage rupture before they can become anything else. That is why healing from past wounds matters so much on this journey. What remains unprocessed often begins to shape your future relationships from the shadows. You may hesitate to trust, minimize your needs, cling too quickly, stay emotionally vague, or keep connections on the surface while privately yearning for more. Not because you are inconsistent, but because you are protecting something tender. The manuscript presents expressive writing and unsent letters as powerful ways to begin releasing grief and unfinished emotion. Letters to an ex, to a lost loved one, to yourself, and to your future self are not presented as sentimental gestures, but as ways of letting emotion move rather than circling endlessly inside. This is especially important during transitions like divorce or loss, when loneliness can be tangled with mourning and identity rupture. There is wisdom in that slowness. The world often pressures women to move on quickly, to fill the void, to stay productive, to look fine, but healing rarely respects those timelines. Sometimes what you need most is not an immediate replacement, but a witness, a page, a ritual, a private truth finally spoken somewhere. And when that truth is given room, something softens. Not instantly, but enough. Enough that the old pain no longer dictates every new possibility. Enough that the connection no longer feels like a threat to what was lost. The book also speaks beautifully about healthy relationships, not just building them, but nurturing them without losing yourself. This theme is central. Loneliness can make women vulnerable to overgiving, overaccommodating, and disappearing into relationships simply because closeness feels scarce. The manuscript answers that with boundaries, reciprocity, monthly check-ins, and the insistence that emotional spaces should leave you lighter, not chronically smaller. This may be one of the most mature lessons in the entire work. Not every connection that relieves loneliness is healthy. Some are distracted by it for a while. Real connection supports your wholeness. It does not feed on your self-erasure. That is why the line from the manuscript matters so much. Boundaries are not walls. They are what make vulnerability sustainable. They help you stay open without becoming overexposed, stay clear without becoming closed, and stay emotionally honest without handing your whole center away. What a powerful reframe, especially for women who have been taught that keeping others comfortable is the same as being loving. The book gently insists otherwise. Love without self-abandonment is possible. Connection without collapse is possible. Support without exhaustion is possible. But not without boundaries, not without self-checking, not without asking, do I feel lighter or heavier after being around this person? Do they show up consistently? Can I be my full self here? These are wise questions, and they become even more important across different life stages. The manuscript recognizes that loneliness does not look the same at 25 as it does at 45, 60, or 70. A new mother may need circles of women who understand her reality. An empty nester may need to rediscover an identity outside caregiving. A woman after divorce may need grief, not just dating. A woman who moves cities may need routine and a sense of repeated local belonging. A woman in later life may need spaces that honor experience rather than assuming social life has already settled. This sensitivity is one of the book's strengths. It does not universalize loneliness in a way that erases circumstance. It pays attention to the season, and the season matters because medicine often changes with the chapter of life you are in. For one woman, connection may begin in a support group, for another in a grief letter, for another in a local class, for another in a parenting circle, for another in finally returning to an old joy, and for another in setting a boundary strong enough to stop pouring herself into what keeps leaving her empty. This is why healing and connection belong together in the latter half of the journey. You are not just learning to meet people, you are learning to carry yourself more gently through time, loss, change, and love. You are learning to choose connections without repeating what hurts you, to remain open without becoming porous, to let the past teach without letting it imprison. There is also a quiet hopefulness here. The manuscript never pretends that healing erases pain or that every stage of life will be easy, but it believes in adaptation, in rebuilding, in the possibility that even after loneliness has lived beside you for years, you can still create a life with more steadiness, more truth, and more nourishing relationships than before. That is not fantasy. It is faithful work. The book brings that faith to the practical level. A connection journal, monthly relationship check-ins, a transition map, letters you never send, daily reflections on what strengthened self-connection and what deepened outer connection. These practices make healing visible and relational growth measurable. They turn what feels abstract into something tangible you can touch and return to. This is what steady rebuilding looks like. Not one dramatic fix, 1,000 compassionate adjustments, one less draining relationship, one more honest conversation, one ritual that helps grief move, one new room where you feel more at home, one reminder that your stage of life is not a sentence but a context, one act of choosing yourself without shutting the world out. And through those small acts, something profound happens. Loneliness begins to lose its role as your defining atmosphere. It may still visit, but it no longer names you. Now there is more in your life than absence. There is intention. There is honored grief. There is self-protection without isolation. There is relational discernment. There is growing confidence in what nourishes you. There is movement. There is a return. There is the beginning of real belonging. From lonely to connected, the daily reset that transforms life. By the time you reach this point, a crucial truth has emerged. A single breakthrough does not undo loneliness, not by a single conversation, not by a single new friend, not by a single good week. It begins to change through repetition, through daily choices, through a new rhythm of relating. The manuscript knows this. That is why it does not end with theory. It ends with practice. A 30-day connection reset. A structure of small, steady actions that turn everything you have been learning into lived reality. The table of contents names this movement explicitly. From lonely to connected, a 30-day connection reset. And that ending is perfect because it protects you from the illusion that insight alone can transform a life. Insight matters, but practice is what teaches the heart, the body, and the calendar. Throughout the book, there are already small versions of this reset. Rewriting unkind thoughts, doing one intentional activity that reconnects you with yourself, taking one small step toward another person, tracking patterns, nurturing energy-giving relationships, creating boundaries, and keeping a connection journal. The manuscript explicitly suggests a month of daily thought reframing, one self-connecting activity each day, and one small social step because loneliness shifts through accumulation, not spectacle. That line deserves to remain lonely, with shifts accumulating, not through spectacle. That is why the reset works. It does not ask you to become a different woman overnight. It asks you to become a more intentional one, a woman who notices, who tracks, who reaches, who reflects, who chooses, who stops passively waiting for life to rearrange itself into belonging. Imagine what that means over 30 days. 30 gentler inner conversations, 30 small acts of self-return, 30 opportunities to move toward people rather than only waiting for them to move toward you. 30 evenings spent noticing where connection happened, however quietly. That kind of rhythm changes the nervous system. It changes identity. It changes what you expect from life. It changes how quickly you spiral when loneliness visits. It changes how a visible possibility comes into being. The practices are beautifully grounded. A connection journal with 3 questions. Where did I feel a moment of connection today? How did I strengthen my relationship with myself? What opportunity exists tomorrow to reach out or deepen a bond? The manuscript describes this journal not as a performative exercise, but as a way to make connections visible and measurable over time. That is one of the most powerful things about journaling in this book. It gives the mind evidence. Evidence is happening, even if quietly. Evidence that you are showing up differently. Evidence is not only absence, but movement. And evidence matters, especially when loneliness has long led you to believe that nothing changes. The reset also embodies gentle courage, not dramatic extroversion, not forcing yourself into constant social effort, something steadier. Text someone, ask a question, join a group, show up again. Say what you need, spend time with someone who leaves you lighter, step away from what drains you, revisit a joy, take a mindful walk, pause before believing the shameful thought. Choose one honest sentence instead of staying silent. These are simple things, but simple does not mean small. Simple things repeatedly become a life. The manuscript is also clear that the purpose of the reset is not to eliminate loneliness forever. That would be both unrealistic and unkind. The purpose is to build a new relationship with loneliness, stop treating it like destiny, and meet it earlier with more skill, more softness, and more options. That is what makes this book emotionally intelligent. It does not promise permanent social standing. It promises greater self-understanding, more intentional connection, healthier boundaries, and the daily practices that slowly create belonging from the inside out. There is something profoundly dignified about it. It respects human reality. People will still disappoint you sometimes. Certain seasons will still feel quiet. Some days, the ache may return. But now you will have tools, language, practices, awareness, a path back. That may be the real gift of the reset. Not that life becomes flawless, but that you no longer feel helpless within it. And if you listen carefully, the whole book has been leading here all along, toward agency, toward authorship, and toward the realization that true belonging is built on repeated acts of care, not luck alone. You care for your thoughts, you care for your body, you care for your grief, you care for your boundaries, you care about how you spend your time, you care for the people who nourish you. You care enough to keep choosing connection, even in small ways, even after fear, even after disappointment, even after long seasons of disconnect. That is powerful, that is brave, and that changes things. Not one giant reinvention, a month of living differently, then another, until loneliness is no longer the central organizing force in your life. Until it becomes one signal among many, not the whole atmosphere. Until connection begins to feel less like a miracle and more like something you know how to cultivate. And when that happens, life begins to feel different in subtle, beautiful ways. The house is still quiet, but not as accusatory. Your phone is still your phone, but no longer the only place you seek proof of being wanted. Your weekends still have space, but that space has structure, choice, and possibility. Your conversations become a little more real. Your relationships become a little more mutual. Your own company becomes a little kinder. That is what a reset really is. Not a total replacement of self, a return, a recalibration, a soft yet determined decision to stop abandoning the parts of you that yearn for a deeper life. And once you make that decision often enough, it starts shaping you into someone steadier, softer, clearer, more connected, more willing to believe that belonging is not over for her. Because it is not, it may only be beginning. You are allowed to belong. If this audiobook leaves you with one truth, let it be that you are allowed to belong. Not when you become less needy, not when you become more entertaining, not when your body changes, not when your life becomes more impressive, not when you stop feeling lonely altogether. Now, as you are, as a human being who needs connection, has been hurt, is learning, is trying, and is still worthy of being seen and met. This book has been saying this in many ways all along. Through its insistence that loneliness is a signal, not a sentence, through its care for life transitions, through its refusal to shame longing, through its steady encouragement to soften your inner voice, rebuild self-trust, risk small vulnerability, choose aligned people, honor grief, and keep taking daily relational steps. The manuscript's core message is clear. Loneliness begins to shift not through one big miracle, but through layers of deliberate, compassionate action that reshape how you relate to yourself and others. That is a deeply hopeful message because it means you are not waiting for rescue. You are participating in your own return. And that is the best way to understand the whole journey, not as a chase, as a return. A return to your own voice after the critic. Return to your own body after disconnecting. A return to your own company after fear. A return to your own needs after shame. A return to relationships that nourish you. A return to the possibility that your life can hold more steadiness, warmth, and realness than it once did. There is also something else the book teaches, quietly but firmly. Belonging is not the same as being surrounded, and connection is not the same as access. Real belonging has a texture. It feels safe. Mutuality, ease, recognition, reciprocity, the relief of not having to perform quite so hard, the relief of not needing to shrink, the relief of being able to tell the truth and remain welcome. You deserve that kind of connection, not because you earn it by being perfect, but because it is part of being human. Yes, the path there may still include discomfort. You may still need to tell the hard truth. Send the first text, leave the draining room, risk of being known, process another layer of grief. Try a new place, show up again after disappointment, speak kindly to yourself one more time, take a smaller step on a day when the old ache returns. But the difference now is that these actions are no longer random. They belong to a pattern, a wiser, more loving pattern, a pattern that says, I no longer treat loneliness as my identity. I treat it as information. I respond. I care. I am moving. I keep building. That is a strength, not loud strength, living strength, the kind that changes lives over time. The manuscript is right to end in practicality because that is where hope becomes real. Journal line. A class was attended. A walk was taken without the phone. A grief letter was written. A social media boundary was kept. A relationship inventory was completed. A conversation deepened, voicing a need. A boundary was spoken. A monthly check-in with yourself about who leaves you lighter. A day when you notice, I did not abandon myself as quickly as I used to. Those moments matter. They are not filler. They form the architecture of belonging. And that is the final blessing of this book. It does not promise that loneliness will vanish forever. It offers you something better, a way to meet it, a way to understand it, a way to keep it from defining everything, a way to create more connections than before. So, If you are listening right now from a quiet room, from the far side of grief, from a season of starting over, from a place where you have long felt unseen, let these words stay with you. You are not broken for needing closeness. You are not weak because loneliness has hurt. You are not behind because life has changed shape. And you are not disqualified from belonging because some rooms do not know how to hold you. There are still rooms, there are still people, there is still time, there is still your capacity to grow into a place of steadiness within yourself. And from that steadiness, connection becomes more possible, not all at once, but it was more possible than it was yesterday, and more possible again tomorrow. That is enough, more than enough. So, keep going, keep noticing, keep softening shame, keep choosing what nourishes, keep becoming safer for yourself, keep letting the right people find the real you. Keep trusting that even if belonging has felt delayed, it is not denied. You are allowed to belong, to yourself, to your life, to relationships that honor your depth, to spaces where your nervous system can rest, to conversations where your truth can remain in the room. And every small, deliberate step you take from here is another way of saying yes to it.